Hey, Nuria.
Hey, Julio.
And hi to our American Colony listeners. We're so happy and grateful for the truly amazing response the show has gotten. We're halfway through the season, so we wanted to just pop in and say hi. Hola, ¿cómo estamos? Good to see you. Un placer.
Yeah, we're super happy with the reception of all the beautiful stories we've been able to share through this season and looking forward to the rest of the show. So, there are some cultural figures that are just titans to our Boricua culture, just icons. Obviously, like Roberto Clemente, as you noted in our episode 3, who's a legend, whose legacy just keeps growing. But there are other Puerto Rican icons that I feel, although they're huge, perhaps nowadays they're not getting the recognition they deserve. I'm talking about Iris Chacón. Julio, do you remember Iris Chacón?
Of course I remember Iris Chacón. I'm a Puerto Rican kid of the 70s and 80s. She was everywhere, both in Puerto Rico and when I was up in New York in the Bronx on Channel 47.
Yeah, she was so unapologetic, so bold, and that makes people nervous, especially in our culture. So that's why I love this episode that journalist and writer Raquel Reichard has produced, along with Diosa and Mala for Locatora Radio. It really put her into context and perspective for me, even though I remember some of the Iris Chacón iconic moments, like the Colon video and stuff like that. She was a true trailblazer, and this episode is really an excellent essay and reflection about women's bodies, our own empowerment, our struggles. As with all of our episodes in American Colony, this episode is also available in Spanish. Just go to our feed and look for the Spanish version, which in this case, it's also called La Chacón.
No translation needed.
No translation needed, no.
And just a heads up, this episode contains discussions of disordered eating, sexual harassment, and sexual content. So listener discretion is advised.
Okay, let's go to the episode.
Let's do it.
There's a scene in the 2006 film El Cantante where Hector Lavoe, played by Mark Anthony, watches a woman shake her derriere on television. His wife, Pucci, played by Jennifer Lopez, steps in front of the TV screen and begins to dance, reminding Hector of all the ass he already has at home. That was my parents. Mommy always swinging her hips around the house and Papi slapping her brown, round Puerto Rican behind con orgullo. Then she'd laugh or toss a flirty, "Ay, Tito," as if she hadn't directed the entire scene. Let me take you there. It's a typical Saturday in our East Orlando home in the early aughts, and I'm laughing on a plastic-covered sofa in my family living room watching Mommy. Once again, our yellow dollar store broom is transformed into a microphone in her hands. She's in pajama pants and one of my brother's old tall tees, but Mommy's moving her body like she's on some old-school cabaret stage at a Caribbean hotel, dazzling her audience in a red, rhinestone-studded bodysuit with a feathered headdress. There's sharp shimmies, salsa work, all of it. With her back to my dad, who's ready to catch her bouncing booty like it's a basketball, Mommy looks over at me, tosses a smile that whispers, "Wait till you see what's next," and then spins till she and Papi are face to face. Even with her signal, I still wasn't ready. Suddenly, she opens her mouth and starts making chicken sounds.
Mi gallo, mi gallito, siempre cantan cocoró.
And Papi? He can't control himself.
Yo no soy de Manatí, pero yo sí soy un gallo.
Fully welcoming the sexual innuendo that I, a shy middle school-aged girl, don't grasp.
Ay, Pito.
¿Qué fue, mi amor? Aquí estoy. ¿Qué tú quieres que te dé?
Yes, I asked my parents to recreate this scene the other day, and they happily obliged. 42 years into their marriage, this is still how they are with each other. I didn't have the language for it then, but I was watching my mother own her power. using her body to assert her sovereignty in our home, her queendom, holding her lover's attention, stimulating desire, laughter, and pleasure. And it turns out the woman my mom was channeling in our living room was the same one Bucci and J-Lo was imitating in the movie. Iris Chacón, the illustrious Puerto Rican vedette who rose to fame in the 1970s. The showgirl who for more than a decade hosted her own weekly hit variety TV show, El Show de Iris Chacón, with intoxicating cabaret performances. The diva who, with her body and her wit, challenged ideas about Puerto Rican sovereignty and helped a generation of women feel more confident, expressive, and in control of their bodies. From the Latino newsletter and Shake It Easy Media, you're listening to American Colony, a series about the ways colonialism shapes the everyday lives of Puerto Ricans. I'm Raquel Reichard. In this episode, Iris Chacón, the legendary Puerto Rican vedette, a performer whose body was desired by people in both the archipelago and the United States, celebrated and displayed. But was it ever sovereign? This is episode 4, La Chacón. In the 1970s, vedettes were the it girls of Latin America and the Caribbean. Influenced by Parisian-style revue shows, showgirls became celebrities on the stage and TV, famous for their extravagant costumes and sensual choreography. Women like Lin May, Rosy Mendoza, and Zulma Faid were regional icons. But Iris was different. Iris's fame extended far wider. She built a career that spanned stages, commercials, magazines, albums, telenovelas, talk shows, films, and more. She had months-long residencies at the Caribe Hilton and one of the longest-running shows in Puerto Rican TV history. Known as the bombshell of Puerto Rico and la Vedette de América, she became one of the most recognizable Latinas in entertainment across the globe. That girl, she broke into US and European audiences long before the so-called crossover of the 90s and 2000s, becoming the first Latin artist to sell out performances at New York's Radio City Music Hall in the 1970s.
Iris Chacón was the standout. And she was featured, at the peak of her career in the Joan Rivers show. She had this connection to, of course, the New York artists like Antonio Lopez. She was featured in Interview magazine.
That's Arturo Rico, a journalist and researcher behind a digital archive and cultural research initiative called Ficheras that preserves the history of vedettes and cabaret culture across Latin America and the Caribbean. He most recently collaborated with Carol G on the creative direction of her 2025 showgirl-inspired album, Tropico Quieta. By the time I was growing up in the 90s and 2000s, Iris's show had ended and the peak of her entertainment career had passed. But I could still feel her presence as a cultural icon. She was like that tia in La Isla who you haven't met, but whose stories were carried over by the relatives who moved to the States. So you kind of feel like you know her. That was the other thing about Iris. Despite her global stardom, she always had an approachable aura. She was always just that girl from Puerto Nuevo, that close-knit neighborhood in San Juan. In the late 1960s, she wasn't dreaming of becoming la Vedette de América. She was a psychology and theater student at the University of Puerto Rico, doing field research at a local Telemundo studio when a producer asked to borrow her glasses for a skit that day. When she went backstage to retrieve the glasses, another producer mistook her for an auditioning dancer and put her on set. Her natural charisma and rhythm caught the attention of network executives, and she was quickly hired as a regular background dancer on shows like El Show de la Doce with Los Alegres Tres, steadily becoming the figure and name we still know today, generations later, across the world.
She was actually a girl next door. She came from humble beginnings and she had no pretension of becoming this diva figure. And she was like really friendly, but also she was like beautiful beyond words. This amazing signature hairstyle. And
Iris debuted her own show in 1972, reaching #1 ratings in Puerto Rico and airing in U.S. markets like New York, Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles, before moving to Guapa TV. Where other vedettes might have been considered too risque for audiences young and old, her variety show was cross-generational. Airing on Saturday primetime, watching the show was a common family pastime. It had something for everyone. Okay, so do you remember when you first saw Iris Chacón? Do you remember how you felt like when you saw her, like the impression that she like made on you?
I just remember she had a big old butt all the time. She used to shake it and shake it. I was like, I can do that.
That's my mommy, Maritza. She's 64 and grew up watching Iris on her living room TV in Long Island, New York, with her mom, 3 sisters, aunt, and uncle. She watched as Iris starred in hilarious comedy sketches and films.
Preocupado. Las 3:30 y el novio sin aparecer.
Performed covers of radio hits and nostalgic boleros with a live house band. And even shared the stage with the legend, Tito Puente. But there was something else. Something too bountiful to ignore. Iris's body. More specifically, her ass. Iris's butt was one of the main characters of her performances. From her provocative choreography, to her ornate, barely there costumes, to the camera work, her bits emphasized her ample behind. And it was intentional. In her music and her comedy skits, Iris often made references that made her culazo the, well, butt of the joke. Western beauty ideals of the 1970s often leaned toward figures like Farrah Fawcett, Cher, and Twiggy, women who were usually white, tall, and angular. Although she was still light-skinned and thin, Iris didn't fit the mold, and she didn't want to. She presented a different kind of beauty and sex symbol. When I was younger, guys used to yell, "Jennifer!" at me to get my attention, obviously referencing J-Lo. But for my mom, in her day, guys used to sing, "Ahí viene Iris Chacón," the theme song of the Iris Chacón show, whenever they saw a curvy girl.
When we would go walking, the guys used to say, "Ay, ahí viene Iris Chacón, Iris Chacón, Iris Chacón, ahí viene Iris Chacón."
Iris never attempted to hide her ample curves. On the contrary, her sequined bikini costumes and big red hair purposely drew attention to her breasts, thighs, and ass. She wanted to be seen. Even off the stage, her voluptuous rear end often played lead. Legend has it that during a charity boxing fight in Puerto Rico in 1976, Iris's backside distracted world champion Muhammad Ali, assisting in local boxer Cholito's win. Then, in 1982, Iris starred in a commercial for Amelie Oil Company's automotive Kulang products, which famously and controversially played on the English word coolant and, yep, un culo, Puerto Rican slang for ass.
Ah, pero oiga, ¿usted no es Iris Chacón?
Sí, y de culan, yo sí sé.
Iris has said that her core mission as an entertainer was to do just that, to entertain, to spread joy and laughter. But in the public's gaze, she did something more. She expanded what was considered beautiful and acceptable in the mainstream. Here's Arturo again.
just because she's so beautiful or because she's carrying a costume that is so beautiful or the lack of costume, she's naked on stage. That's a showgirl. In France, she will often be described as a woman who is super talented. She can sing, she can dance. She is also a comedian. She's part acrobat. So she's multi-talented and she can do it all. And she can put on a show herself alone on stage just because she's talented beyond belief.
Even Mommy, who spent most of her week in church and school, would come home to not just watch Iris, but to put on Vedette-inspired performances with her sisters. One by one, they would appear from a beaded curtain, flipping their hair and shaking their hips to caramelo y chocolate. From the diaspora to the archipelago, Iris was also doing something else, normalizing female sensuality and confidence at a time when women were still expected to be modest.
She went on the David Letterman show. I will never forget that. I was like, Dios mío, qué vergüenza. Esa mujer was like putting her feet up on the chair, and she was like all like she was oozing sex. And David Letterman was like, his eyes were popping out of his head.
That's Lydia Gregory. We met this spring at the Caribe Hilton while I was reporting on this story. Lydia spent the best of her young adult years at this resort, partying with her girlfriends at its nightclub Juliana's, just steps away from Club Caribe, where Iris had her cabaret residency.
Yo me acuerdo cuando yo lo vi, yo dije, qué vergüenza, todo el mundo va a decir que las puertorriqueñas somos así. Even though we wore the little bikinis and the little mini skirts, we were really all uptight.
Growing up in a conservative and, as she says, sometimes snobbish community in Guaynabo, Puerto Rico in the 1980s, Iris gave her permission to make racier clothing choices and feel freer in her body, whether during those sweaty club nights or weekend beach days.
I was actually one of the first to wear like a thong on the beach, and it was like, oh my God, your butt's hanging out. We would wear the smallest bathing suits, the smallest of anything, but we were still prudes in a sense.
Seeing Iris confidently moving her cuerpazo made a generation of women more self-assured in their own bodies. She was an early model of empowered movement, both for women like Lydia and Mami, and later for the Latina pop stars who followed in her footsteps, artists like Jennifer Lopez, and even Karol G's current showgirl iteration. In spite of the empowerment I received at home from my mommy and from my Puerto Rican neighborhood, the influences of the US beauty standards during the heroin chic era in the 90s infiltrated my sense of self. So as the curves my mom used to tease and tantalize my dad with started to form on my own teenage body, I hid them. During scorching Orlando summers, when the temperatures hit the high 90s and the humidity felt like we were all wading through a bowl of sancocho, I'd go to school in an oversized sweatshirt, disguising my growing breasts, chubby arms, soft belly, and widening hips. I hid them because the tabloids made fun of women whose bodies looked like mine. But I also hid them because they drew attention from older men who scared me, men who stalked and harmed me. I starved my body and threw up my mommy's platos de arroz y habichuelas. I walked through my school hallways with my head down. I skipped school dances. I didn't want to be seen or heard or to leave any evidence that I was there at all. Somewhere amid the daily catcalls and the red ink circling cellulite in glossy magazines, I learned that I, a young, shapely Puerto Rican girl, could be desired but not fully accepted. I could be devoured, even preyed on, but not actually respected. And I soon learned it wasn't just me or my body. Showgirls, these women whose beauty, talent, and confidence I and so many women I knew admired, were often reduced to spectacle, just pretty little things to salivate over and then abandon once the show was over. For tourists visiting Puerto Rico, vedettes became props in their fantasy of Caribbean paradise. They were treated as decorative as casino chandeliers, as excessive as all-you-can-eat resort buffets, and as seductive as the turquoise waves glimmering under a golden sunset. They existed to provide pleasure, escape, and status, thrown back and discarded like a shot of the finest Puerto Rican rum. And like Puerto Rico itself, colonized for hundreds of years, their bodies were mined for pleasure and profit while their autonomy was treated as negotiable. US tourists began arriving in Puerto Rico en masse in the mid-20th century, following federal efforts to rebrand the archipelago from what was described as the whorehouse of the Caribbean into a tropical paradise and model for capitalism under Luis Muñoz Marin's New Commonwealth experiment.
If you're looking for a vacation paradise, go south to Puerto Rico, hub of the Blue Caribbean.
Entertainment catering to visitors reinforced this tropical fantasy in the 1950s and 60s, with hotels staging cabaret performances featuring live bands that played boleros, dancers who performed rumba, and of course, showgirls who glimmered in jeweled headdresses and sequined bikinis.
Give yourself to complete relaxation and enjoyment in a land of mañana.
By the 1970s, film productions were already using Puerto Rico as a location for lush tropical settings.
There were some films made during this time, one of which is Que Bravas Son las Solteras, that Iris Chacón herself is in as a protagonist, as a lead, that are used to showcase Puerto Rican tourism infrastructure.
That's Frances Negron Montaner, a Puerto Rican scholar and filmmaker whose work explores gender and coloniality.
And so they're using the star, in this case, as a vehicle to promote, obviously, her career, but also to promote tourism. And in that process, you see an overlap between beautiful woman, beautiful landscape, tourism infrastructure come to us. And they're selling a particular experience. And that playbook, I have to say, hasn't changed very much.
But in places like Puerto Rico, where people have long been denied full self-determination, entertainment and the visibility that comes with it can also become a way to assert power and imagine change in subtle and transformative ways.
In spaces like Puerto Rico, because of its colonial status, we do not have all the infrastructure to exercise power, project our power and our voice. Then the arts become a very, very important stage. So that paradox, we have to be continuously turning it on their head so we become visible in ways that advance our autonomy and our power and project this power.
And when Iris took the stage in the 70s, she did just that. Dressed in glittering bodysuits and high heels, shaking her hips and flipping her hair, Iris performed familiar Latina stereotypes. She was the spitfire, the seductress, and the hot-blooded Caribeña. But throughout her performances, she slipped in jokes and winks that made it clear she was in on the act. In fact, in her production, she was manipulating the imperial script, and Puerto Rican women understood it, because she was performing for fellow Puerto Ricans, not really for the gringos. When she played into the dense damsel, she'd deliver a smirk so the girls knew she was actually a mastermind, strategically deploying the persona as a means to an end. In her performance of Caliente Caliente, a 1981 pop hit originally by Rafaela Carrà about being untouched and burning with sexual desire, Iris asks her lover in a fragile, breathy voice why he hasn't made a move on her. Then she winks at the camera, playfully signaling that this display of girlish insecurity is all an act, designed to get exactly what she wants. She is well aware of what she's doing, that she's both playing into and rebelling against stereotypes, turning it all into a source of power. According to Frances, this rebellion expanded what women felt was possible for them. Society forced them to choose between the devout wife and mother or the so-called obscene showgirl. Iris, herself a mother and wife, while she was still a famed vedette, showed them they could be both, none, and more.
I think one of the key reasons that Iris Chacón became a larger-than-life figure is that she created a myth. And we could call this myth the Puerto Rican sex goddess. But a sex goddess that is at once innocent and joyful and maternal, and that has opened the path for other people to follow.
Even still, the male gaze attempts to keep women trapped in this virgin whore dichotomy, especially the male colonial gaze that views Puerto Rican female sexuality as theirs to conquer and control. Now in my 30s, I've worked through my disordered eating and feel comfortable showing as much or as little skin as I want on any given day. But there are still moments when I hold back. Not because I'm ashamed of my body, but because of how I know it may be interpreted and consumed. As a curvy Boricua in the US, my body has been exotified, read as inherently hypersexual and available to fill someone else's fantasy. These days, it's not insecurity about my appearance that makes me second-guess an outfit. It's the violence with which men respond to confident, voluptuous women. And today, when I watch Edie's perform songs from her catalog 5 decades later, I see myself in her. Not only in the curves of her body, but in her lyrics and how she performs them. She gives voice to the contradictions of Puerto Rican womanhood, of being desired but not always loved, of being a fantasy that ultimately makes us vulnerable to harm. The same colonial gaze that exoticizes our island also exoticizes our bodies. But Edie's confronts these realities from a place of agency and self-possession. And watching her reminds me of my own power. Starring in the 1977 Spanish film aptly titled La Mujer es un buen negocio, Edie's performs Ray Perez's Muchacho Barrigón, giving the catchy Guaguancó new meaning. Dressed in a rhinestone-encrusted black and silver bikini, she shakes her bare ass while singing, Pero oye cómo me están criticando. She wants her haters to know that she's heard the tall tales they're spreading about her, and she's unimpressed. Then, in 1982, she performed Se Dice de Mí, a 1943 milonga made famous by Tita Merello in the 1950s. The song is about a woman defiantly reclaiming her worth in the face of public ridicule and scrutiny. Wearing a glittering, cleavage-bearing dress that flashed her entire backside every time she spun, Edie sang, She addresses the criticism again, refusing to be shamed by the whispers of those who she teases are obsessed with her. Underneath every song, show, and sequin bustier is an affirmation for the Puerto Rican women listening. Tú eres la que manda. And for Edie's, it wasn't just positive self-talk. It was a reality she lived and modeled for others. After becoming a TV backup dancer, she took a trip to Paris, watched a cabaret show, and hoped to bring the art back to Puerto Rico, designing her career as a vedette. She and her then husband, Elin Ortiz, produced her own live performances and TV show. When the couple divorced in 1973, she continued to produce the show without him for another decade. At a time when women barely had creative control, and in an industry where they were expected to just sparkle on display, she was making decisions about lighting, songs, costumes, dances, skits, and guests. And none of it was easy. Here's Arturo again.
If you wanted sequins, you either had to go to Paris or to Brazil. Those were the only countries. It was even more expensive than one can imagine.
And as Edie's created agency for herself, through entertainment and the financial independence it gave her, she also created opportunities for women and queer communities, putting money in their pockets and creating space to carve out freedom for themselves within the same restrictive conditions.
Showgirls were like an entire economy. They hired dancers, musicians, choreographers, so they were not creating independence for them only, but for the entire community. It's a lot of women and a lot of LGBTQ people that if there were not dancers or designers or makeup artists, they wouldn't have a lot of opportunities for like gay men or trans women back in the 1960s and 70s.
In 2026, the legacy Edie's left behind isn't just remembered. It's alive in a new generation of Puerto Rican performers navigating many of the same colonial conditions. An economy that still caters to gringos at the expense of its own people, and the conservative politics that once sought to contain her. Despite these challenges, a vibrant grassroots scene of showgirls, burlesque dancers, drag performers, and cabaret artists has emerged across the archipelago. They define what spectacle, sensuality, and performance, in their own terms, means today. In bars, restaurants, and small independent venues, these performances become spaces for experimentation, pleasure, respite, and community care. And many of the artists pay direct tribute to Edie's, channeling her flaming red hair and exaggerated femininity in drag, dancing to her songs and burlesque numbers, and honoring her humor and audacity in their own performances. That's a crowd going wild for Dulce Malicia, a queer Puerto Rican burlesque performer and father of the burlesque house Que Se Lo Quite in San Juan. For 4 years, Dulce, also known as La Bombón Boricua, has actively created spaces for other performers to discover the history, learn different dance and show techniques, and perform on stages. And be paid for it.
Las tendencias las pone the queer people. Desde siempre, ¿entiendes? Como la música se populariza porque en el club queer, eso es lo que nosotros queremos escuchar. And that's how artists grow, realmente. Y las vedettes y la comunidad queer have influenced each other since forever.
It's the queer community that popularizes trends that then become mainstream, says Dulce. And vedettes have always been part of that ecosystem. Keeping this art form alive hasn't been easy. And at a moment when Puerto Rico is being hit especially hard by U.S. economic crises, finding the money to book shows and pay performers can feel nearly impossible. Understanding these barriers, she started Colectivo Pluma, a community initiative that supports queer Puerto Rican artists by raising funds for costumes and productions, donating gently used gowns that can be reconstructed for the stage, and sharing resources that help emerging and veteran showgirls to continue performing.
Básicamente hacemos apoyo a personas queer y trabajadoras sexuales para que puedan entonces tener recursos para empower themselves through the arts.
She's also teaching burlesque dancers and sex workers how to sew. In many ways, vedette culture provides the safety to be seen, heard, and felt. Audiences are captivated by the showgirl's autonomy, cheering her on. There, you can exist, do, and be, without the fear of judgment or punishment. There, sensuality is understood as embodied sovereignty, rather than an invitation for violation. That's what Edie's gave to women. A reflection of who we are when we're not performing for the male gaze or the church or the state. The care of being witnessed, the permission to be the governess of our own bodies, the freedom to be playful, the right to revel in our pleasure, the audacity to exist confidently in our bodies. That agency is contagious. And as Puerto Rican bodies, human and land, continue to be desired, violated, and extracted, it's also how we care for ourselves. It's the respite el show that Edie Chacón brought Puerto Ricans weekly during times of crises. It's the job she created for women and queer folks, and the opportunities Dulce now also builds for her own community. As Francis says, Puerto Ricans are a spectacular people, and our spectacle, our performance, and our arts carry our complex history, and it's also what heals us from it. It's why Edie's, now 76, has spent the last few years partnering with medical and wellness groups in Orlando in service of Puerto Rican seniors, largely those who were displaced from their homes after Hurricane Maria. It's why this year, La Vedette de América traveled back to Puerto Rico for sold-out back-to-back performances in Caguas, where she charmed audiences singing and dancing to her classics. It's why she ever embarked on her showgirl path, to comfort her people through the joy of entertainment. The Caribe Hilton, where Edie's held her residencies over the years, now has a permanent on-site exhibit documenting her time there. Meanwhile, Chico Cabaret, the moody venue that opens at the Fairmont El San Juan in 1958, relaunched in May with a live band and vedettes in red feathered headdresses. Yes, at a time when more Americans are buying property and are being incentivized to move to the archipelago for tax benefits, cabaret culture, some catering to foreigners but still frequented by locals, just as it was years ago, is back. And at the Vault, a speakeasy at the Wyndham Grand Rio Mar in Rio Grande that hosts weekly cabaret shows, I got to experience showgirl caretaking for myself. Dressed in a curve-hugging burgundy dress that stretched from my neckline to my calves, I attended a Friday show looking more like I was headed into a business meeting than a burlesque performance with strip teases and lap dances. And yet, when host and performer Angela Flecha scoped the room for someone who was unabashedly confident in her body and sexuality, she walked over to me.
What is your name? Raquel. Everybody say hello to Raquel. Yeah.
In that moment, my sensuality was reflected back to me, not as an object of consumption, but as something that belonged fully to me.
That seduction doesn't always seek attention. Sometimes it lives in the quiet mastery of a woman that can command the room without a single word. That is called power.
The reality of being a Puerto Rican woman is as paradoxical as Puerto Rico itself. I can be confident in my body and sexually liberated, yet still find myself covering my skin or shrinking to avoid the gaze of men who could harm me, even while knowing that what I wear cannot protect me. Agency does not erase vulnerability. And in many ways, that same tension shapes Puerto Rico. We can take to the streets and protest against federal policies that make it easier for outsiders to profit from the island than for many Puerto Ricans to remain on it, using our voice and asserting our power, while also understanding the limits imposed upon it. But in spaces like this, the ones Edie's created for Puerto Rican women in the 1970s and 80s, and the ones her showgirl descendants continue to create, we are invited to imagine and experience a different reality. One where we don't just know our power, but we can safely exercise it. For a moment, we are free to inhabit our bodies, our desires, and our voices on our own terms.
In the next episode of American Colony, the federal rules that decide what Puerto Rico can buy, sell, and ship, and the coffee shop owners who found freedom from them, one tour date at a time with Bad Bunny. Yeah, Bad Bunny.
Realmente comenzó de manera media orgánica, por usar una palabra, y es que él comenzó a venir y nos siguieron llamando.
American Colony is a series from the Latino newsletter and Shake It Easy Media. This episode was produced by me, Raquel Reichard, and Locatora Productions, and it was edited by Nuria Net. Special thanks to Arturo Rico, Francis Negro Montaner, Dulce Malicia, Lydia Gregory, and my mommy and papi, Maritza y Tito, for sharing their time and stories. And thanks as well to Caribe Hilton, Fairmont El San Juan, and to Discover Puerto Rico and CL Tours PR for providing background and context that informed this episode. American Colony is an original concept by Julio Ricardo Varela. Nuria Net is our senior editor and Joaquin Kotler is our senior producer. Our hosts are Julio Ricardo Varela and Nuria Net. Carlos Berrios Polanco is our producer. Suzanne Ramirez de Arellano is our consulting producer. Cristina Hernandez is our managing editor.
Amalia Nunez Pires is our video producer. Social media videos are by Anthony Modesto Milian and Aliana M. Bigio. Ricky Rodriguez is our illustrator. Alan Amil is our composer. Additional music courtesy of Soundstripe. Joaquin Cotler, Nuria Net, and Julio Ricardo Varela are our executive producers. Support for this program comes from the Mellon Foundation, the nation's largest supporter of the arts and humanities. More at mellon.org. American Colony was also made possible by individual donations. To support the nonprofit work of the Latino newsletter, click on the Donate tab at thelatinonewsletter.org to give.